Garfield. You've probably heard of him. Big fat tabby cat about yay high, hates Mondays and exercise, and has an insatiable appetite for layered Italian cuisine. Yeah. I got those words from my Garfield dictionary. It means he really likes lasagna. What about it? But where did it all begin? Why do we see him everywhere? Let's talk about that in the history of
Garfield and Friends.
Let's go back to the year 1975, where this guy, Jim Davis, has been working on a comic strip called, you guessed it, Norm Nat. Now, Norm Nat is a comic strip centered around talking bugs, and Davis is really pushing for it. But, shockingly, no one's biting.
So, what do you think? Good, right? Get this, they talk to each other, and they're both bugs.
Listen, Jim. Yeah, it's good. Your gags are great. But bugs? Nobody can relate to bugs.
So Davis did a little research into the popular comic book characters of the time, and he realized that while characters like Snoopy dominated the dog market, there wasn't really any big characters dominating the cat market. So now with that revelation, he made a new strip called John, as in John Arbuckle, Garfield's human owner. This guy's really good at naming things. Now this John strip gave us our first look at Garfield and John Arbuckle, as well as a few more characters you may or may not recognize, such as John's roommate Lyman and Lyman's dog Spot, who now you'd probably know as Odie. Thankfully, as the comic gained traction, Davis renamed the strip to the star of the show in 1977 to Garfield. Third time's the charm, right, Jim? The very following year, the United Feature Syndicate accepted the strip to be published nationwide, and on June 19, 1978, Garfield officially debuted. Oh yeah, it's happening, baby. Garfield is off to the races, making his way into hundreds of newspapers and making millions of dollars in merchandise sales. I mean, in 1980, after just 2 years of being a comic strip, he made his animation debut in an episode of the Fantastic Funnies.
Garfield, you're getting too fat.
I am not.
Come on. Then shortly after, the very first Garfield compilation book debuted, titled Garfield at Large. Now, what's interesting about these compilation books is they were designed to be wider than they are tall to accommodate for the long panel comic. This format eventually becoming known as the Garfield format. Then just 2 years after that, the very first Garfield primetime television special debuted in 1982, and 2 more years after that, Garfield appeared in his very first commercial.
Do you know me?
Who cares?
That, of course, is Garfield. He's fat,
Full-figured.
ill-mannered.
The next year, in 1985, the first Garfield video game release, titled Garfield Eat Your Words, for the Apple II computer, after an Atari game was scrapped. Alright, but hold on, what even is the deal with Garfield? He's just some big, fat, sarcastic cat, right? Big whoop. But hold on, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Garfield's not the only character in the franchise. What about the other characters?
Also, I got a haircut, so ignore that.
But other human characters include John Arbuckle, Garfield's owner, who's known for being a goofy geek who struggles to charm women, including Dr. Liz Wilson, Garfield's veterinarian, though he does end up eventually dating her in 2006. I mentioned earlier that John had a roommate named Lyman, which is actually Odie's owner, and if that surprised you, that it makes sense, because Lyman was actually phased out of the comics in the early 80s, so Odie's ownership was basically transferred to John. Speaking of Odie, Odie is a yellow dog with a long tongue known to be dim-witted and the victim of Garfield's pranks. But deep down, they do still care for each other. Alongside Odie, other characters include Nermal, or as he calls himself, the world's cutest kitten. He is a thorn in Garfield's side, which results in him bullying Nermal, and often attempting to send him to Abu Dhabi. Seriously, that happens multiple times. Finally, to round off the felines, we have Arlene, who is a pink cat and Garfield's love interest and girlfriend. Oh yeah, also Garfield's friends with a mouse named Squeak, which is kind of important because they help each other with their schemes or whatever sometimes. And Garfield has a teddy bear named Pookie, who is also notable. But anyways, now that we know the characters, let's get back to their antics.
For a walk in the park, or a shot in the dark, friends are there.
You might remember earlier that I mentioned that the first Garfield television special debuted in 1982. Well, in that time span, from 1982 to 1991, there were a total of 12 primetime television specials for Garfield and a 10th anniversary documentary. Those 13 items being as follows. Here Comes Garfield, Garfield on the Town, Garfield in the Rough, Garfield's Halloween Adventure, Garfield in Paradise, Garfield Goes Hollywood, A Garfield Christmas, Happy Birthday Garfield, that was the 10th anniversary, Garfield, His 9 Lives, Garfield Babes and Bullets, Garfield's Thanksgiving, Garfield's Feline Fantasies, and finally, Garfield Gets a Life. Now during that almost decade of specials, the very first Garfield television show debuted in 1988, featuring not only Garfield, but also the characters of the U.S. Acres comic strip, which is another comic strip created by Jim Davis. Big fan of his own work, clearly. Though the U.S. Acres segment will be known internationally as Orson's Farm. Also, throughout the show and the 12 TV specials, Garfield was voiced by this guy named Lorenzo Music, who is arguably the greatest guy to voice Garfield. I mean, come on, listen to this.
Let's see, while John's out, should I do tons of grueling yard work, or should I nap and eat a lot? Guess what?
That's Garfield. Finally, entering the 21st century, Garfield gets his first movie called Garfield, the Movie, in 2004, starring Bill Murray, that's right, the Ghostbuster, and we get our first look at Garfield in the real world. I mean, look at this guy. Come on, tell me that's not the most realistic cat you've ever seen. Following up Garfield the Movie is the sequel, Garfield A Tale of Two Kitties in 2006, starring Bill Murray again, as well as Garfield's British doppelganger, voiced by Tim Curry. That's right, Garfield has an evil British twin. After the two critically acclaimed and financially successful live-action Garfield movies, 3 animated direct-to-video movies were released titled Garfield Gets Real, Garfield's Fun Fest, and Garfield's Pet Force, with Garfield being voiced by Frank Welker. Unfortunately, these films performed the worst of all the Garfield movies. Big shocker there. But then in 2009, The Garfield Show released, being the second Garfield TV show, and this time being 3D animated, featuring new characters alongside the original cast, like Vito, the Italian restaurant owner, and Harry, a stray cat who interacts with Garfield. The Garfield show ended up continuing until 2016, which brings us closer to modern day. Now, I'm not gonna lie, as we get closer to the current day, Garfield-related things just become more random. Believe it or not, in 2011 there was actually a Garfield stage musical called Garfield Live, which toured in North America and Asia. Additionally, Garfield comic books, like actual comic book style, have been made, and in 2013, Garfield Kart released, which is a video game that's basically a spin-off of Mario Kart, but it kinda sucks. Fortunately, a better version of Garfield Kart was released called Garfield Kart Furious Racing in 2019. Also, another strange thing, apparently in 2018 there was a Garfield ghost kitchen located in Dubai and Ontario called Garfield Eats, and they sold like Garfield themed food like lasagna or whatever. Oh, and you also probably didn't know this, there was actually a third Garfield show called Garfield Originals, which aired in France from 2019 to 2020, and it was more of like a slapstick, like silent film style. Very intriguing. But now finally, the most recent Garfield thing you're probably thinking about, the Garfield movie. Came out in 2024, starred Chris Pratt as Garfield. Certainly an interesting choice there. It also featured Samuel L. Jackson as Vic, Garfield's dad. The movie did receive a lot of negative criticism due to its unfaithfulness to the traditional Garfield character, but nevertheless, it was still a commercial success, so of course, they are making a sequel. But that is not the most current Garfield news, because if you are watching this video when it releases, as of September 10th, 2025, Garfield Kart 2, All You Can Drift, will have released, and I will most certainly be checking that out. So, that pretty much wraps up the history of Garfield. Hopefully you learned something. I'd say something valuable, but we're talking about a fictional comic character, so more so something interesting. But I hope you enjoyed, and make sure you stay tuned for the next episode where I will cover a different pop culture character's history. Thanks for watching.